Reading from Srila Prabhupada Leela Amrita. August the 12th. Prabhupada felt very weak. It was on the afternoon of his appearance day, and he was sitting at his desk in the main room of his house. He lay down on his seat and put his head against one of the arm pillars. The following day he felt so weak he could not walk or stand. He had no appetite and ran a fever of 104 degrees. A local doctor arrived and examined Prabhupada. Malaria. He prescribes a medication which Prabhupada took once or twice and then refused. A second doctor came and prescribed different medicines. Stop bringing these doctors, Prabhupada said. No doctor can cure me. It was August, the monsoon season, and many devotees fell sick. When Shrutakirti, who had recently returned to his post as Prabhupada's personal servant, contracted malaria, Kuladri, who had come to Vrindavan to attend on the temple opening, volunteered to assist. When Kuladri got malaria, other devotees became ill with malaria, jaundice, dysentery, and various digestive problems. The weather was overcast, hot, and humid, and thousands of varieties of insects began appearing. For several days at a time, the sky would be cloudy with a temperature in the 90s. Then the sun would come out and steam everything up with almost intolerable heat. It was Vrindavan's most unhealthy season. As Prabhupada's condition worsened, the devotees became morose and even fearful for their spiritual master's life. They brought Srila Prabhupada's bed out where it was cooler on the small patio outside his house. His servants would massage or fan him. Days passed and Prabhupada didn't eat, except for a few grapes and some slices of orange. This was the way his father had died, he said, by not eating. Some remarks frightened Prabhupada's disciples, such remarks frightened Srila Prabhupada's disciples all the more, and they began visiting the samadhis of the Goswamis to pray that Prabhupada would be cured. One evening, Harikriya stayed up all night in Prabhupada's room, chanting softly a continuous kirtan of Hare Krishna. Prabhupada liked it. This kirtan, he said, is what actually gives us life. After that, devotees took turns so he was always killed. Prabhupada explained that his illness was due to the sins of the ISKCON leaders, 80% of whom are not strictly following the rules and regulations. He said, even in Vrindavan, some of the devotees weren't regularly rising at 4 a.m. Since Prabhupada was speaking little, he had only briefly mentioned this cause of his illness. But brief as it was, it crushed his disciples. As for who was guilty, each disciple had to say for himself. But in a mood of, oh God, what have we done? All the disciples in Vrindavan immediately became very attentive to the rules and regulations. Shall Prabhupada
Jai.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 5, Chapter 1, Text 41, it's the last text of the chapter. Bhomam Divyam Manusham Cha Bhomam Divyam Manusham Cha Mahitvam Karma Yogajam Mahitvam Karma Yogajam Yash Chakri Niryayupamyam Yashi Chakri Niryayupamyam Purushanujana Priya Omam Divyamanusham Cha Mahitvam Karma Yogajam Yaschakri Niryopamyam Purushanujana Priya Omam Divyamanusham Cha Mahitvam Karma Yogajam Yaschakri Niryopamyam Purushanujana Priya.
Jai. Bhomam Divyamanusham Cha Mahitvam Karma Yogajam Yaschakre Niryopamyam Purushanujana Priya Bhomam Divyamanusham Cha Mahitvam Karma Yogajam Yaschakre Nirayopamyam Purushanujana Priya Bhomam Divyamanusham Cha Yaschakre Nirayopamyam Purushanujana Priya Bhomam Divyamanusham Cha Mahitvam Karma Yogajam Yaschakre Nirayopamyam Purushanujana Priya Bhomam
Of the lower planets.
Divyam Heavenly Manusham
Of human beings. Cha also. Mahitvam all appearances. Karma by fruitive activities. Yoga by mystic power. Jam born. Yaha one who. Chakre
did
Niraya withheld. Opamyam comparison or equality.
Comparison or equality.
Purusha of the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Anujana to the devotee. Priyaha most dear.
Translation. As a great follower and devotee of the sage Narad, Maharaj Priyavrata considered hellish the opulences he had achieved by dint of fruitive activities and mystic power, whether in the lower or heavenly planetary systems or in human society. Please repeat. As a great follower and devotee of the sage Narad.
As a great follower and devotee of the sage Narada,
Maharaj Priyavrata considered hellish.
Maharaj Priyavrata considered hellish
opulences he had achieved.
The opulences he has achieved.
By dint of fruitive activities and mystic power.
By dint of fruitive activities and mystic power.
Whether in the lower or heavenly planetary systems.
Whether in the lower or heavenly planetary systems.
Or in human society.
Or in human society.
Purport by Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
True.
Srila Rupa Goswami has said that the position of a devotee is so super excellent that a devotee does not consider any material opulence worth having. There are different types of opulences on earth, in the heavenly planets and even in the lower planetary systems, known as patala. A devotee, however, knows that they are all material and consequently he is not at all interested in them. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, Param Drishta Niraptitya. Sometimes yogis and jnanis voluntarily give up all material opulences to practice their system of liberation and taste spiritual bliss. However, they frequently fall down because artificial renunciation of material opulences cannot endure. One must have a superior taste in spiritual life. Then he can give up material opulence. Maharaj Priyavrata had already tasted spiritual bliss, and therefore he had no interest in any of the material achievements available in the lower, higher, or middle planetary systems. Thus ends the Bhakti purpose in the fifth canto, first chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled The Activities of Maharaj Priyavrata. As a great follower and devotee of the sage Narada, Maharaj Priyavrata considered hellish the opulences he had achieved by dint of fruitive activities and mystic power, which, whether in the lower or heavenly planetary systems or in human society. So just to recap, this is the end of the chapter. Summary, Maharaj Priyavrata. So in the beginning of the chapter, we find that he is detached from worldly opulence and he received transcendental knowledge from Narada Muni, and therefore he wasn't interested in entering materialistic life of sense enjoyment or in a kingdom. But because his father Swami wanted him to take over the kingdom, and Lord Brahma and many demigods and sages came, and they were asking him to accept the kingdom. Then on their behalf, he accepted the royal throne. And we see Maharaj Priyavrata, he married Bharishmati and begot 10 sons and 1 daughter. And then he also had a second wife, in which he begot 3 sons. And some of his sons became sannyasis, some of his sons became rulers of the 7 islands, and 3 of them became elevated to the post of Manu, Siddha of great character, and his daughter married Sukracharya. So he also divided the surface of the globe into many different divisions so that different classes of people would live peacefully without fighting amongst each other. And Maharaj Priyavrata had lived with his wife and family for many thousands of years. He also had created a second sun, and the rims of his chariot wheels created 7 oceans and 7 islands. And after all these amazing feats, Maharaj Priyavrata became again renounced. He considered all his opulence in the kingdom just entangling, and he wanted to give it all up and take to the renounced order of life. So we see that in the very first line that he says, as a great follower and devotee of the sage Narada, Maharaj Priyavrata considered hellish the opulences he had achieved. So because he was a great follower and a devotee of Narada Muni, then he had developed the same qualities, similar qualities as Narada Muni, of not being attached to materialistic things, being renounced and devoted to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because he was a follower of Narada Muni, then he wasn't interested in any of his material opulences he'd achieved through mystic power, through fruitive activities, whether in the war, heavenly planets, or in human society. He wasn't at all attracted to them. So this wasn't because he was artificially practicing sort of renunciation, but because he had a superior taste, he had a higher taste in spiritual life. And there's a nice verse in the Bhagavad Gita that's quoted from where is Paramdrishta Nivartati, is a higher taste. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 59, it's described that the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, though the taste for sense objects remains, but ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste is fixed in consciousness. So it's not that he doesn't, he experiences something higher so he can give up a lower taste. It's not something artificial thing. And Maharaj Priyavrata already had a higher taste, if you see in the very beginning. He was totally renounced and he was just absorbed in self-realization. He wasn't attracted to any, even the kingdom, to enjoy the kingdom. So he already had tasted that supreme higher taste. So this, all this material opulence couldn't compare to it, couldn't deviate him from that higher taste. And Prabhupada in the purport said that unless one is transcendently situated, it is not possible to cease from sense enjoyment. This is the Bhagavad Gita purport. But one who has tasted the beauty of the Supreme Lord Krishna in the course of his advancement in Krishna consciousness no longer has a taste for dead material things. So in the beginning, Prabhupada says that the process of restriction from sense enjoyment is by rules and regulations. As there are such restrictions are only good until one actually has a taste for Krishna consciousness. When one is actually Krishna conscious, he automatically loses his taste for pale things. So this is the situation. In the beginning, we follow certain rules and regulations because we haven't got a higher taste. We have to follow certain rules and regulations so we can be restricted from sense enjoyment. But it's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to actually get a higher taste, and we'll automatically follow the rules and regulations, and you won't become attracted to sense enjoyment. And so we need to develop this higher taste for Krishna consciousness, otherwise we'll just fall back down to trying to enjoy the material world again. And that's the secret success for developing this higher taste. For one who's not in Krishna consciousness, he may be able to control his senses by other means. For example, the yogis, jnanis, they can actually seem to control their senses, but as soon as there's some sort of thought of sense enjoyment, go back down and try to gratify their senses again. So ultimately they fail and they fall down to sense enjoyment. But a devotee, because he's experiencing a higher taste in serving Krishna, then his senses are more controlled. And because he's using everything in Krishna's service, then there's less chance of him falling to sense enjoyment. And and we see that in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is saying that in chapter 2, verse 44, in the minds of those who are too attached to sense enjoyment and material opulence, and who are bewildered by such things, then the resolute determination for devotional service to the Supreme Lord does not take place. So, when one's attached to bhoga, which is sense enjoyment, and aishvarya, material opulence, he cannot have one point of intelligence to practice bhakti yoga. So these are the two things that Krishna describes that deviate or don't give us proper determination. resolute determination to practice devotional service. So sense enjoyment and material opulence. So these are the two main obstacles that we have to overcome to actually become one fixed in devotional service, to have one point of attention in devotional service. So here we see Maharaj Priyavrata. He had one pointed intelligence, he had one point intelligence to practice bhakti yoga. He wasn't attracted to material opulence, mystic power, or sense enjoyment, or any of these material things. He already had a higher taste for the devotional service. So we can see how he was so advanced, because he wasn't just practicing, he wasn't just having this whole kingdom for a few years, but it was thousands and thousands of years that he had all this opulence and all this sense enjoyment and so much. Let's see. He had so much facility for sense enjoyment, but he wasn't attracted to it, even after thousands of years of it. So we can see in the material world, we only live for a few years, and whatever little we have, we become so attached to it. Anything material, any opulence, any facility. But Maharaj Priyavrata, he was such an advanced soul that it didn't deviate him from his devotional service. We can also see in the life of Maharaj Bharat that he also had a great kingdom, wife and family, but when he was just a young man, he gave it all up. The Prabhupada said it was like he gave up the kingdom like it was some stool. That's how he treated it. So this is the great souls. They're not so attracted to these opulences. Same with Raghunath Das Goswami. You see in Chaitanya Charitamrita that he had so much opulence. His father had given him so much opulence. He inherited so much from his father's wealth, and he had a beautiful wife. But none of these things could bind him to his family life. He was just so attracted to, and he kept running away from his family and his father, and to try to join Lord Chaitanya's movement. And and every time his father would bring him back, he would send his bodyguards and bring him back. But eventually, Raghunath Das Goswami escaped and became part of the Lord's associate of the Lord. And so these great souls, they had that facility of great opulence because Krishna knew it wasn't going to disturb their mind, it wasn't going to deviate them from their Krishna consciousness. Same with like Sudama Brahman. Krishna gave him all that opulence because he knew that it wasn't going to distract him from devotional service. So sometimes Krishna doesn't give us so much opulence because it could be a source of distraction, a source of deviation for us. So in one sense, Krishna is looking after all his devotees in different ways, and he knows what we need, he knows what's to be beneficial for us and what's not going to be beneficial for us. So if we get a lot of opulence, then Krishna is giving it to us to test us or to give it to us because he knows we are not going to get distracted by it. He has confidence in us. So, but it's so nice to read about these wonderful personalities who can actually control their senses and not become so overly entangled in material life. And they had far more than we could ever have. Like Maharaj Priyavrata had an opulent kingdom. He had so much facility for sense enjoyment. He had a beautiful wife and wonderful children. So all these things It's a general desire for most people in this material world is to have this. But he had it all, and still he wasn't attracted to keeping it and trying to enjoy it for his own sense enjoyment. So, because of the grace of Narada Muni, he could actually resume his original position of renunciation. And that's why we need the association of such great souls, our spiritual masters, who can actually keep us in line. By their grace, we can remain fixed in Krishna consciousness and not be attracted to the glitter of the material energy. So, any questions?
I was just wondering if the person joins from a very impoverished condition, then is he more likely to be less steady than someone who joins from very opulent? Because if someone joins from very opulent, then he's already renounced it, so he can't really be tempted. But if you're very impoverished and you join, and it's a beautiful temple, nice food, and you have a nice dhoti to put on, and you have more chance of being promoted by the right opulence.
Well, it's part of his living the Lord's temple. It's not his temple, it's not his opulence, it's not like he's been given. If he joins a temple, then he's renounced all material sense enjoyment and he's performing devotional service. So it's not for him to enjoy.
It's interesting. Some devotee was saying that in India they get that kind of thing, like a people joining for a rainy season. Rainy season starts, it's like a very high interest. People spend 4 months while the rainy season, and when rainy season is over, then they go back to.
Is that because of the weather?
Yes.
So they renounce material life because of the weather, and they join the temple.
There's some economic kind of reason, and when the weather is back to normal, then they do.
Well, here it's all the time like that. It's all the time raining. So that's why everyone stay here.
Also, I heard that if they had devotees join in poor countries, the devotees would stay for some time, and then they'd run off with all the silverware or something. So, because they weren't used, we don't see it as very opulent, but the prasadam we eat at a feast is actually quite opulent, and the gym facilities that we have are quite opulent. And I also heard it said that if a devotee does join and he's used to a certain high level of opulence, then he'll need that to be able to continue on in his devotional service. He'll need a certain amount of facility. But if he's given that facility, then he'll be able to render devotional service. Somebody else, it would be an obstruction to them, or a distraction, because they're not used to it. But if they come and they have a lot of good karma, then they'll be used to living like an emperor, so they're not going to be keeping the clothes in a cardboard box.
And his needs, addressing devotees' needs.
Yeah.
Of course, it's only so much you can provide, but meditation on devotees' needs, I think, is significant if you want to movement to expand, or devotees stay in the movement or stay in the temple. And some consideration is definitely necessary.
Yeah, as long as you're seeing it in relationship to Krishna, it's not like the devotee is going to get all this facility and then he's going to not chant his rounds, not perform devotional service. It's still part of he's still going to perform his devotional service. It's not going to distract him from that. So whether you live in a small tiny ashram in the temple, or whether you live in a house outside, it's a big mansion, you're still going to chant your rounds, you're still going to serve the deities, you're still going to offer your food, you're still going to read Prabhupada's books. So whether it's that facility or another facility, still we're going to perform our devotional service. And
There was a story, wasn't there, about one guru. He had some disciples, and he had a married couple. All his disciples were brahmacharis, and there was a married couple. And the brahmacharis were looking down on them because they were householders living outside. So the guru said, okay, well, why don't you steal all their opulence off them? So they snuck in and they were stealing everything. And they were stealing her earring. And so she moved over and allowed them to steal the other earring. She pretended she was asleep just so they could steal everything, you know. And then the next day, the guru took one of the brahmacharis' copans away, and they were all fighting with each other about who taken his copans, you know. And the guru was showing them that these so-called attached householders are actually more renounced, although you have nothing, but what you do have, you're very attached to a life, although they have a lot of opulence, they're not attached, you can take it away and they're not upset.
And also, if the devotees are preaching, then the Lord may offer so much, facility for that. Prabhupada, he was offered like a Rolls Royce, and they said, "Oh, why are you driving it? Why are you in a Rolls Royce?" And he says, "Well, why not a gold one?" Because he says, even this is not good enough, because he's a representative of the Lord. So if Krishna were to come, even if we were to offer him a gold Rolls Royce, it wouldn't be good enough. So sometimes, if it's a great spiritual master, then he will be offered all his opulence because he's a representative of Krishna. But it's not that he's attached to it; he's just using Krishna's service, and he's accepting that on behalf of Krishna. So we also have to do the same in one sense, where we don't need all this opulence, but we can use it in Krishna's service, or we can accept it on behalf of Krishna and not be attached to it. So I think it all depends on the consciousness. Like you said, a beggar can be attached to his penny, but somebody who is a devotee, he may have so much wealth, but he's not attached to it for his own sense enjoyment. It's only for Krishna's spreading Krishna's glories. So, we're not going to reject it. This is the Yukta Vairagya, we're accepting everything, all the wealth, all the facility to use it in Krishna's service. So it's not false renunciation. False renunciation is that you don't need to accept it, even for Krishna's service.
In the story of Srila, wasn't it that Krishna gave him everything because he was attached to being renounced?
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah.
At the same time, he wasn't going to get distracted by all that opulence either, because he was so devoted to Krishna.
But then is that really distracted by the renunciation? That's why Krishna wanted him to give that up as well. Because it's the attachment, it's not what you're attached to, it's the fact that you're attached to something. And then Krishna's showing you, okay, well, you're attached to being renounced and having nothing, so I'm going to give you everything.
I was just thinking of Jagannath Goswami. I was reading about Jagannath Goswami last night, and it's amazing. His renunciation was so great. I mean, it was so unique that it's not possible for anyone to imitate such renunciation. It's, he basically didn't have even a hut to stay in, not even a bhajan retreat at that time. Later on he did, but he was just, out in the open, in what, the scorching heat of the sun, and he would partly drink. He was only sleeping for 90 minutes a night, sometimes not even that, and he was drinking like 1 cup of buttermilk in a day. And it's just, if we were to live in that standard, we would get so many people joining the temple. We were to, describe this kind of renunciation. This is what Krishna consciousness is, You won't get many people wanting to do that, perform all that austerity. So Prabhupada wanted us to have opulent prasadam to distribute, to attract people to Krishna consciousness. He wanted us to have nice temples so it would attract people. So it's all for preaching, really. Prabhupada wanted us to have so much facility to attract people to Krishna consciousness. So if it's just like a little shack, a little hut somewhere, no one's going to be that interested to come and see the temple or practice Krishna consciousness. So in order to, for preaching purposes, we need facility, we need certain opulent prasadam, opulent lifestyle, so that it can actually attract people to wanting to take up Krishna consciousness. But it's not like we're trying to enjoy it for our own self. It's like the example of the royal palace, Buckingham Palace, and the Queen staying there. So it's her palace, but those servants that go there and work there, they're also walking through the same palace, but they're just servants. They're not actually the enjoyers of the palace. So we're servants of the deities. We're servants of Krishna. So we may be able to walk through the same building as Krishna stays in. We can take the prasadam that's been offered to the Lord, opulent prasadam. But our status is still the same, our position is still the same, we are eternal servants. So if we have this mood that we're just servants of the servant, then we won't get distracted by all this, and it won't, it's just Krishna's kindness upon us. We can see it's Krishna's giving us so many gifts, and we are grateful to Krishna for it. And he's allowing us so much facility and such a wonderful lifestyle.
When Shivaram Swami was here, he was explaining the principle of our ashram system, and he was saying, when he started looking into it and writing books about it, at that time I think he was still writing, it's published. So he was saying that he was, you would have liked that he would have found out about this principle earlier, that it's not necessarily everything using this word opulent, but also just the basic certain things that people need, for somebody it may be opulent, for somebody it's just a basic need. So you were saying, when those needs are taken care of, then his mind is more peaceful. So it's like the idea is sometimes we just look, into this, what we're going to do next month or what we're going to do next year. But, if you think about devotee for the rest of their life, how they can be engaged in such a way and have a certain needs met, that their mind is kind of more peaceful to perform sadhana. Because, we may try kind of artificially live a very austere life, and the mind is very disturbed, and then your sadhana is very poor. You may be like looking that you're chanting, but your needs are not met, and you're just meditating on something else. So yeah, just wanted to bring this point, that opulence sometimes can be even some basic things and basic needs, and when those are met, your mind is peaceful, or more peaceful, that you can fix your mind more on the holy name, on reading and performing your service. But if your mind is extremely disturbed and you're performing all that, it may be a danger zone. You can't function properly.
Yeah, everyone has got different needs. So somebody's needs maybe more than others. That's why there is Varnashram, because it facilitates everyone's needs.
Mm-hmm.
And also as devotees go householders, they have more needs than a brahmachari, a sannyasi, or a vanaprastha. So they have certain needs that have to be met, and that helps them in their spiritual life and their devotional service. So yeah, everyone's has different needs, but like it's one man's food is another man's poison. So you know, you have to understand what is our actual need, and is it suitable for our ashram we're in. So I think it's like introspection. You have to understand, do we really need it, or is it just a desire? Because sometimes we mistake what our needs are for what our desires are. You know, like it's unnecessary, but it's just a desire that comes up. But it's actually a very basic need that we definitely need to function in Krishna consciousness. So we have to discriminate between our needs and our wants.
There's an actual quote by Srimad Bhagavatam Class. It's referring to Kadama Muni and Devahuti, because Kadama Muni wanted to get married and Devahuti wanted a nice husband. But instead of either of them going out to try and initiate that, they both depended upon the Lord. So he arranged a perfect arrangement, because they were both perfectly satisfied with each other. They were perfectly compatible. So Prabhupada says in the purport that this is the best system for satisfying your desires. You have certain desires, then you leave it in the hands of the Lord, and you say, okay, well, I'm thinking I want a really nice whatever it is. maybe it's good for me, maybe it's not, but I'll leave it up to you. And if you think it's going to be good for me, then you'll provide it. And if you don't, then you won't. And then that way the Lord, being the expert judge of time and circumstance, will give you exactly what's befitting to enhance your devotional service rather than distract you from it.
And also, due to performing devotional service, Krishna will give facilities as well, and he will give so many gifts like opulence or a nice situation. So we have to be careful we don't misuse it. You know, we don't misuse Krishna's kindness, and we see it's coming from him. If we always keep Krishna in the center and see that it all belongs to him, then we won't get distracted by whatever we've been given. And that's the main thing. That like here, Raj Priyavata, he had so much, but it doesn't kind of make him distracted from Krishna. And so that's the main thing, to keep Krishna in the center. Whatever happens, accept it as Krishna's mercy, and don't misuse it. Always see that it's Krishna's kindness, and be grateful. Always be grateful.
Sometimes for the welfare of the devotee, Krishna may not fulfill their need, maybe a need. Because if he did, then something maybe that wouldn't be for be an obstacle, or cause block their Krishna consciousness, or maybe when we suffer, we're more Krishna conscious than in times when things are easy, or so-called easy. So Krishna may keep depending on that. So like some people, they want to get married, but they can't find the right partner, and they find that like one devotee, she got married a couple of times and it didn't work out, and she found that just one particular occupation was fulfilling all her. She became satisfied with that, and the need for marriage was so it's an case by case, but things like that can happen.
Yeah. If Krishna fulfilled our, because that's the difference when we take up devotional service and Krishna's hand is there, and he changes things for us. Like we may, have desire for something, but Krishna can see that it's not going to be good for us. It's going to take us away from Krishna consciousness, or it's going to be entangling. So Krishna doesn't fulfill that desire or that need, and but he gives us something better instead, something else that is going to, give us more satisfaction. And because Krishna is personal, everyone's different, and everyone's got different circumstances, and sometimes Krishna has to give us suffering so that we can turn to him. He has to kind of accelerate the progress, by putting it on. Like, for example, it's like an analogy is like if somebody's in a well and they're trying to get the well, but they just haven't got the impetus or the determination to do it, then if there's an alligator at the bottom of the well, then it really pushes that person out of the well. So sometimes Krishna, puts difficulties in our life to accelerate the process of us getting out of this material world. So we're on the fast track, and sometimes it's not really appreciated when we're going through it, but when we get out of that situation, then we really see it's Krishna's mercy. So everyone goes through different things, and Krishna's looking after everyone and everyone's interest and everyone's welfare in different ways. And sometimes it's through difficulties and suffering, and sometimes it's through nice facility. So we just have to see what Krishna wants us to go through and why he wants us to go through it, because he knows what we need to get out of this material world. So.
We also can see that, Krishna is there, but also it requires, a certain degree of faith as well to reciprocate with that and take advantage of that. Not necessarily everybody, especially in the beginning stages, have that level of faith. And you can see Maharaj Priyavrata, like a king, the leader is like is acting on behalf of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he's taking care of the citizens. Citizens could say, okay, it's just Krishna gonna take care of me, but actually he's doing on behalf of Krishna. And in that way, people whose level of faith is low, then they develop that faith, that Krishna is carrying me. And usually Krishna cares is not that the things fall from the sky, when Krishna cares for us, usually it comes through a devotee. It's not these things, just manifest out of nowhere. So that's another point, is that we also, need to do things on behalf of Krishna towards others, that are young devotees, or whatever the situation, whatever is our sphere of influence. We need to provide that care on behalf of Krishna, and at the same time educate people to fully rely on Krishna, that Krishna will take care of you.
Sometimes taking care can be that case, like if someone maybe it may put someone off, like for example, if someone joins a temple, for example, prematurely, that might put them off Krishna consciousness altogether. So we need to see what they're ready for, to give them what they need at every step. Because sometimes find that people join, they're so enthusiastic to join, and they want to join the ashram and so on, and they find it's too much. So we need to know what we need to maybe baby steps, sometimes more baby steps. So before we actually take that step, so that we can know that we can care for them, because they want to accept the care that we can provide.
It's true. That's part of devotee care, is to see that devotees are looked after nicely, and because sometimes it's harder to keep devotees enthusiastic in devotional service, or it's just as hard as making new devotees, is to help devotees stay in devotional service and be satisfied and enthusiastic for years and years and years. So it's quite a it's a pressure on the leaders as well as those who are trying to take up Krishna consciousness. So the leaders have to know what are the needs of the people, of the devotees, and also care can also come in a way that we have to keep some people further away for their own benefit. It's not that we don't want people to join, but sometimes it's for their benefit that they have to stay a distance from the devotees. So because familiarity breeds contempt, so we have to be careful that people come too quickly, too fast. They may resent it later. So there has to be like a balance, what people can actually, how much they can take of Krishna consciousness, at what speed, at what level, and kind of balance that. So every individual is different. And the leaders have to be aware of that and help people come to the level of Krishna consciousness they can actually be steady at and slowly build up. Srimad Bhagavatam ki
Jai. Jai. Jagannath Priya Mataji ki.